Welcome, everybody. Um, I'm glad to have everybody back again. Wish I was seeing you in person, but I guess that's not something that I get to choose. Um, so anyhow, we are going to be moving on. We've already talked about sort of normal speeches. We've talked about like what a TED Talk or how to analyze that. And as I have said a couple of times to you, um, the big point of what we're trying to do is trying to make a decision of whether or not a speech is actually effective in achieving the goal that it sets to accomplish. And usually, when you're dealing with political speeches, or especially if you're taking ones that are sort of those historical speeches, they almost always are going to be ones that were successful in reaching their goal. But you do have to do some thinking when it comes to what was their goal and how did they actually accomplish it. And so for this one, we're going to be looking at the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. And there's some really important things to note for this one. Um, Number one, before you start this lesson, what I would really like to make sure that you've done is that you've gone back and you've done some sort of prerequisite work before we go into this lesson. The first, if you go into your Schoology account under the speeches, you're going to see that there's a folder for historical speeches. And within that folder, there are some assignments that have a 1 next to them. Those are the things you should do on the first day. And this is sort of a 3-day unit or so. So what I want you to do is I want you to go through and make sure you've read the 3 pieces that I gave you. And one of them was the Gettysburg Address. Another one was the preamble to the Constitution. And I know I gave you the whole Constitution. You don't have to read the whole thing. You can if you want to, but you're not required. I just want you to read that little quick preamble. And then, of course, the other one is the Declaration of Independence. And I'm asking you to look at all of those because they all have some significance to this speech, and they're all kind of being referenced at different times. So you have to do that. Then you'll notice that there's some number 2s next to some things. And the number 2s you should do before this also. So the number 2s, there was some background information about this speech in particular, and there was watching the whole speech beginning to end. And then you also have the actual text in a text format of this. So I want you to have watched the whole speech and preferably without the text in front of you, but you're going to need to use that text in order to complete what we're going through today. So that being said, on to what we would have done if we were all together. And I would have had you talk to somebody else, but since I can't, we're just going to do the discussion on Schoology. And what I want you to do is to make some observations about the Gettysburg Address and the Declaration of Independence. And hopefully you've already done that before you've started. I want you to think about how did they use ethos, pathos, and logos in those. Think about the actual wording. These were so important. So we have to think about things like repetition, parallel structure, rhetoric, which is, the ethos, pathos, logos. What type of language did they use? What words did they use? What is the connotation of some of those words? And I want you to think about it in all 3 of them. I know I only have 2 here, but I want you to think about what those things are because those are the pieces that sort of define who we are as Americans. They're the things that we keep referring back to. And so I want you to be able to think about those deeply and think about what do they say about us as a people, as a group? And, how does that show up in the world today? Because we still use those as our sort of guides. What some of the other guides that other people use are. And then hopefully you listened to Martin Luther King's speech before you started this. And I want you to think about the way that it built upon some of those other documents, right? Because that building is so important. And for you to think about what are some of the other ones? Allusions, not illusions, okay? So we're looking at allusions with a, let's see, here with an A, right? So I want you to see it's an allusion. Allusions are whenever you make a reference to something else. So things like when he starts out the speech, right, referring to the time as how many score ago, when he does that, that's very similar to the same way of how many scores and years ago it was that Lincoln started out. So with his speech, so that would be an allusion. There's also some great songs that he refers to, and there's some Bible verses that he refers to. So I want you to think about what allusions are referred to throughout this. Okay, and you're going to be writing those down. So I would keep a good, you know, keep good uh, track of all of those. And then I also want you to be able to consider ethos, pathos, and logos. So that color isn't showing up. I want you to consider ethos, pathos, and logos. Um, and how does he do that? How does he establish he's a person worth listening to? And that can include even that guy who introduces himself. Pathos is heavy in this speech. Like this is a heavy, heavy, heavy pathos speech. So I want you to think about what he does in order to really move us emotionally. Um, and he moved people to want to change the world. And this speech has an awful lot to do with it. So what does he do? What does he go for? And of course, we know that pathos is that anytime it stirs up emotion. And I know a lot of times we've talked about it as if it's like, we're watching the SPCA ads where, they're hoping you come and get the puppy. But it doesn't have to be just that. A call to our nationality, a call to our values, things like that all work within the pathos. And sometimes when you hit those other types of pathos, that's what makes people really want to change things. So I want you to really think about how he does it. Not just that he does it, but how does he do it and how does it help him accomplish the goal? And of course, logos. We know that most people can't really be moved totally with pathos if there isn't some logos. And you're going to find it's a little harder to find in this one. And that's probably because he usually embeds those instances. His examples are embedded within these stories and within the pathos of it. So just pay some real close attention to all of that and be looking for it as you go back through things. Clearly, you were going to be working in groups of 3, and we can't do that. So I'm going to kind of block that out because it won't be in groups of 3, and I'm real sorry about that. But I want you to look for information. Just go through the speech and find those things that you might possibly use if you were going to write an analysis of this. Now, we're not going to, but I do want you to, think about this as we go. And some of the things that you want to consider that I definitely want you to heavily consider is the thesis. The thesis of this is, of course, what you think the whole thing is about. And for an analysis, it's whether or not Martin Luther King effectively made his goal. So you have to think about what was his goal and what did he do to effectively get that. Background. I gave you some background information in that other video, but there's definitely some other important background information for him, including things like he was a reverend, who were his parents, where did he grow up, what's his educational background, all of those. Not to mention, of course, we're in the backdrop completely of the civil rights movement and what was going on there. So that's really important. And this is also thinking about where did it happen. This was at the Civil Rights March on Washington. He's standing at the bottom of at the pedestal of the Lincoln Memorial. He's overlooking the reflecting pool. How does all of that tie into how effective the speech is? And then you're also going to think about the presentation of the speech. How did he use his voice? How did he use movement? He didn't move a lot because he was kind of tied to a microphone, but what are some of the things he did? He definitely changed how quickly he was speaking. He changed how loudly he was speaking, all of those things. And how did he use those to sort of build this speech into what it becomes and to affect his audience in the way that he did? And then, of course, you're going to talk about the text, the actual words he used. Why were those important? And this is the ethos, pathos, logos. This is when you're looking for parallel structure. This is allusions and symbolism and imagery and all of the fantastic things he does in the speech. So I want you to take a very close look at the actual text and the actual wording that he has in the speech. And then think about, how does that connect to us and our values? Because he is definitely talking to our values throughout the whole thing. And then we have to think about the historical importance overall. What effect did this speech have? I think it's pretty clear when we have a Martin Luther King Day that we celebrate at school, and when we talk about figures in the civil rights movement that he's clearly very important. And so we have to think about what was the historical importance of the speech, of him as a person, as all of that, because that's all part of understanding what this whole speech is about and whether or not it's effective. And of course, the final piece is, what are the other things that you noticed? Beyond just these sort of basic things, there are some other things that make this historical. It makes it, when we talk about great speeches in American history, this is always one of the top few that people, immediately go to. And so what are some of the things you noticed that you think were particularly powerful? And some of that is going to be to notice, he was a reverend. So you're going to see that he made a lot of those things to, made a lot of references to the Bible, and he made references to songs that we all learned and sang, and national songs and biblical songs, and he does all sorts of different things throughout this. And I thought it was really interesting too, the idea that he went completely off script for the whole second half of the entire speech, and that's, to me, that he just ad-libbed this whole ending is amazing. So just something for you to think about through, because you're going to be taking all of these pieces and you're going to be kind of making a quick outline of, if you were going to write an actual analysis of this paper, what would you include? And think about, how is that different from some of the speeches we did before, like a TED Talk? Why would you have it be so different? And does that apply to every single historically important speech? Because clearly his isn't the only one that's historically important. So I want you to think about those and what some of those. And then after you're done with that, and I'll have that assignment up in Schoology for you to be able to complete, I want you to look at I want you to look through what other people said, first of all, so that you have a little better understanding of everything. And maybe you'll see something that somebody else said that you hadn't noticed before. But I'm also going to have up a claim your speech place. And when you choose to claim your speech, then I am going to, it has to be something different than other people. But I also would like you each day to watch a speech of some sort and to decide whether or not it effectively met its goal. So you have to think about what's going on. Now, you can choose something that's happening right now, because we know there's a lot of important speeches happening right now in the midst of this sort of crisis that we're in. And it can be something like one of Cuomo's speeches, or it can be one of Trump's speeches. Any of those would be fine. Another thing that you can do is you could watch a TED Talk each day. Again, that's totally fine. Not going to feel bad about that at all. Or you can also do something like go to a place like AmericanRhetoric.com, because they have some great historical speeches. So if you're thinking, you want to listen to the Day That Will Live in Infamy speech, or you want to listen to any of those, or Ronald Reagan's speech after the Challenger disaster, or any of those speeches that are sort of historically important, you can certainly go to any of those also. But once you've found one that you think, I really like that particular speech, and that's the one that I want to write about, then you can make a claim for it up on Schoology. So I hope this really helps everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Again, if you have any questions, you can certainly ask me on Remind, or send me a message or an email or anything like that, and I'll be happy to talk to you. Have a great day.